June 4th, 1876, Feriye Palace, Istanbul. A scream echoes through the palace corridors. Servants rush into a room, and what they find stops them cold. Sultan Abdulaziz, the former ruler of the Ottoman Empire, the man who once commanded millions, is lying on the floor in a pool of blood. His wrists are slashed, deep cuts, arterial cuts. He is dead. The official story? Suicide. The Sultan, depressed after being deposed 5 days earlier, took his own life with a pair of scissors. Case closed. But here is the problem. Almost nobody believed it then, and historians still debate it today, because the evidence does not add up. The wounds were too precise, too deep, the kind of cuts that would be almost impossible to self-inflict. And Abdulaziz? He was not the type to give up. He was a fighter, a former wrestler, a man who could bend iron bars with his bare hands. Would a man like that really kill himself with scissors? Or was he murdered, silenced, eliminated by the same people who had overthrown him? This is the story of Sultan Abdulaziz, the boy born into a changing empire, the prince who grew up watching his father try to modernize, the man who became sultan and tried to finish what his father started, the first sultan to visit Europe, the ruler who built the world's third largest navy, and the man who ended up dead under the most suspicious circumstances imaginable. February 8th, 1830. Topkapı Palace, Istanbul. A boy is born to Sultan Mahmud II and his consort, Pertevniyal Sultan. His name, Abdulaziz. He is not the eldest son. He has older brothers. In the Ottoman system, that usually means he has a chance at survival. The heir gets the attention and the danger. The younger princes? They just exist in the shadows. But Abdulaziz's childhood was anything but ordinary. His father, Mahmud II, was a revolutionary sultan. He had destroyed the Janissaries, the powerful military corps that had controlled the empire for centuries. He was trying to modernize everything: the army, the government, the culture. Abdulaziz grew up watching this, watching his father fight against tradition, against the old ways, against an empire that resisted change at every turn. And he learned something important. Modernization was not just necessary, it was survival. But Mahmud died when Abdulaziz was just 9 years old, and his older brother, Abdulmajid, became sultan. For the next 30 years, Abdulaziz lived as a prince. Not in a cage, the cafe system had been abandoned by then, but still, waiting, watching, learning. He had siblings, many siblings, brothers and sisters from his father's various consorts. Some died young, as was common in that era. Others lived and competed for influence. His full brother, Murad, later Sultan Murad, the fifth, was particularly close to him. They grew up together, studied together, and later their fates would become tragically intertwined. As Abdulaziz grew older, something became very clear. He was different. Physically, he was massive. Over 6 feet tall, extremely rare in the 19th century, especially in the Ottoman court. Broad shoulders, barrel chest, hands like sledgehammers. And he was strong, unbelievably strong. Historical accounts describe Abdulaziz performing feats of strength that sound almost mythical. He could bend thick iron bars with his bare hands. He could carry 2 grown men under his arms like they were children. He once lifted a horse that had fallen into a ditch, just picked it up and set it back on its feet. He loved traditional Turkish wrestling, güreş, and was genuinely good at it. He would challenge his guards, his courtiers, anyone brave enough to face him, and he usually won. This was not just physical vanity. In Ottoman culture, physical strength was respected, admired. It signified power, masculinity, leadership, and Abdulaziz had it in abundance. But he was not just a brute. He was also educated. He spoke several languages: Turkish, Arabic, Persian, some French. He was interested in music, especially traditional Ottoman classical music. He played instruments. He composed. He was, in many ways, a Renaissance prince, strong, cultured, ambitious. In 1845, at age 15, Abdulaziz was married for the first time. His first wife was Duranev Kadın. She was Circassian. Many Ottoman sultans and princes married women from the Caucasus region, as they were considered beautiful and cultured. The marriage was Marikasan. Mashnia Sansashnit. Not dramatic, just a typical dynastic marriage. Duranev gave him children. She played her role as a prince's consort. But when Abdulaziz became sultan in 1861, his harem expanded significantly. He took several more consorts, as was traditional for sultans. The most significant were Edadil Kadın. She gave him several children and was considered one of his favorites. Hayranidel Kadın. Another important consort who bore him sons. Nesharek Kadın, known for her beauty and intelligence. In total, Abdulaziz fathered at least 6 sons and several daughters. The exact number is debated. Palace records from this era are incomplete. His sons included Yusuf Izzeddin, his eldest, who would later become heir to the throne and meet his own tragic end. Mahmud Celaleddin, Mehmed Seyfeddin, Ahmed Nureddin, and others. His daughters were married off to important officials and princes, as was customary to create political alliances. But here is what is interesting about Abdulaziz's family life. He was not particularly known for harem intrigue or drama. Unlike some sultans who were controlled by their mothers or favorite consorts, Abdulaziz seemed to keep his personal and political lives relatively separate. He was affectionate with his children. He enjoyed spending time with them. But he was also focused on his role as sultan, on his duties, on his mission to modernize the empire. Family was important. But the empire came first. June 25, 1861. Sultan Abdülmecid, Abdulaziz's older brother, died suddenly at age 38. And just like that, Abdulaziz became sultan. He was 31 years old, in his physical prime, strong, confident, ready. The empire he inherited? Not so much. The Ottoman Empire in 1861 was in crisis. It had lost wars, lost territory. The Crimean War had just ended, and while the Ottomans were technically on the winning side, the war had exposed how weak the military really was. The economy was a mess. European powers were circling like vultures. Russia, Britain, France, they all wanted pieces of the empire. And internally, corruption everywhere. Inefficient government, outdated military, crumbling infrastructure. Abdulaziz looked at all this and thought, I have to fix this. I have to modernize. Fast. And he tried. He really tried. Abdulaziz threw himself into reform. First priority, the navy. He was obsessed with building a modern Ottoman navy because he understood something crucial. The Mediterranean was the key to Ottoman power. Control the seas, control trade, control wealth. So he ordered ships, dozens of ships, ironclads, frigates, corvettes. He bought some from Britain and France. He built others in Ottoman shipyards. By the mid-1870s, the Ottoman Empire had the third largest navy in the world, after Britain and France. That is incredible when you think about it. He also invested in the army, new rifles, new artillery, European-style training. He sent officers to study in European military academies. He built railways. The empire's first major railway network started taking shape under Abdulaziz. Istanbul to Edirne, lines connecting Anatolia, plans for a Hejaz railway to the holy cities. Telegraph lines spread across the empire. Suddenly, messages that used to take weeks could be sent in hours. He reformed education, opened new schools. The Galatasaray Lycée, one of the first modern European-style schools in the empire, was founded during his reign. He sent hundreds of young Ottomans to study in Europe, engineering, medicine, military science, law. The idea was simple: learn from Europe, catch up, compete. And for a while, it was working. But Abdulaziz wanted to see Europe for himself. In 1867, he did something no Ottoman Sultan had ever done before. He left the empire as a guest, not as a conqueror. The journey started in June. Abdulaziz, along with a large delegation including his nephews, future sultans Murad V and Abdulhamid II, sailed to France. Paris was hosting the Exposition Universelle, a massive World's Fair showcasing technology, industry, art, culture from around the globe. Abdulaziz was mesmerized. He saw steam engines, railways, industrial machinery, telegraph systems, photographs, modern weapons. He met Napoleon III, the French emperor, who hosted him lavishly. There were parades, ceremonies, state dinners. Abdulaziz was treated as an equal, a fellow monarch, not as some exotic curiosity from the East. And he loved it. Then London. Queen Victoria invited him to Britain. He visited Windsor Castle, toured factories, saw the British Parliament in session, the first time he witnessed a functioning parliamentary system. He was impressed by British industry, by their ships, by their organization. He also visited other countries: Belgium, Austria, Prussia. Everywhere he went, he was greeted with respect, with ceremony. European newspapers covered his visit extensively. Some were condescending. The Turkish Sultan visits civilization. But others were genuinely respectful. And Abdulaziz came back to Istanbul with his head full of ideas. We can do this, he thought. We can modernize. We can be like them. But there was a problem, a massive problem. All of this modernization cost money, enormous amounts of money. Ships cost money, railways cost money, schools cost money, reforms cost money. And where was this money supposed to come from? The Ottoman treasury was not exactly overflowing. Tax collection was inefficient, corruption ate up revenues, wars had drained resources. So Abdulaziz did what seemed logical at the time. He borrowed from European banks, from British and French financial institutions, at high interest rates. At first it seemed manageable. The empire could afford the payments, and the investments would eventually pay for themselves, right? Better infrastructure would lead to more trade, more revenue, more prosperity. But it did not work out that way. The investments took time to pay off. Meanwhile, the debt kept growing, and growing, and growing. By the mid-1870s, the Ottoman Empire was drowning in debt. The treasury could not even cover the interest payments, let alone the principal. And people started blaming Abdulaziz. He is wasting money, they said. building palaces while the empire starves. Now, was that entirely fair? Number. Most of the spending was on legitimate modernization. But Abdulaziz did build new palaces. He did live lavishly. He enjoyed luxury. And in times of crisis, people do not forgive luxury. The perception became reality. Abdulaziz was seen as extravagant, wasteful, out of touch. And that perception would destroy him. By 1875, the empire was in crisis. The debt was unsustainable. The government declared bankruptcy, the first time in Ottoman history. Uprisings broke out in the Balkans, Serbia, Bosnia, Bulgaria, Christian populations rebelling against Ottoman rule, supported by Russia. The military was restless. Soldiers had not been paid in months. Officers were frustrated. And a group of reformers, intellectuals, bureaucrats, military officers started meeting in secret. They called themselves the Young Ottomans, and they believed the empire needed radical change, not just modernization, constitutional reform, limits on the Sultan's power, a parliament, rule of law. And they believed Abdulaziz was the problem. Too autocratic, too extravagant, too resistant to sharing power. The leader of this group was a man named Midhat Pasha, one of the most brilliant and controversial figures in late Ottoman history. Midhat was a reformer, a constitutionalist, a man who believed the empire could only survive through fundamental political change. And he decided Abdulaziz had to go. May 30th, 1876. Around 2 a.m. soldiers surrounded Dolmabahce Palace, where Abdulaziz was staying. The Sultan was asleep. He woke to shouting. Footsteps, armed men bursting into his chambers. At the front was Hussein Avni Pasha, the Minister of War. Along with naval officers and a contingent of troops loyal to Midhat Pasha. Your Majesty, they said, you have been deposed, by order of the Sheikhul Islam and the cabinet. Abdulaziz, this massive, powerful man, was stunned. Staja's son was stunned. Savri is treason, he said. No, Your Majesty, this is necessity. Abdulaziz tried to resist. He argued, he demanded to know who authorized this. But what could he do? He was surrounded, outnumbered. His own guards had been either bought off or replaced. His physical strength meant nothing against guns. They took him away, first to Topkapı Palace, then, a few days later, to Feriye Palace, a smaller, more isolated location on the Bosphorus. He was now a prisoner. His nephew, Murad V, his brother's son, was declared the new Sultan, and Abdulaziz was left to contemplate his fall. What happened in those 5 days between the coup and Abdulaziz's death? We do not know much. Palace records are vague. Witnesses gave contradictory accounts. What we do know is that Abdulaziz was agitated, angry, confused. He kept asking to see his family. His mother, Pertevniyal, Sultan, was also under house arrest. He wanted to see her. They refused. He demanded to know what would happen to him. Would he be exiled, imprisoned, allowed to retire quietly? Nobody would tell him. Some accounts say he was depressed, that he barely ate, that he paced his rooms constantly. Others say he was defiant, that he told his guards, "This will not stand. My loyalists will restore me." Was he planning something? Did the new government fear he might escape or organize a counter-coup? We will never know. Because on June 4th, 1876, just 5 days after being deposed, Sultan Abdulaziz was found dead. The servants who found him described a horrific scene. Abdulaziz was on the floor of his room, blood everywhere. His wrists were slashed, deep, gaping wounds that had severed the radial arteries. Nearby, they found a pair of scissors. The official story came quickly. Too quickly, some would say. Suicide. The former Sultan, unable to cope with the loss of power and the humiliation of deposal, had taken his own life. A medical examination was performed. The court physician, who was appointed by the new government, declared it suicide. The wounds, he said, were self-inflicted. The scissors were the weapon. Case closed. Abdulaziz was buried quickly, quietly, in the mausoleum of his father, Sultan Mahmud II. And the new government moved on. But the questions did not go away, because when you actually look at the details, things do not add up. First, the wounds themselves. Multiple witnesses described them as extremely deep, clean, precise. The kind of cuts that would require significant force. Could someone really do that to themselves? With scissors? While in pain and bleeding? Medical experts at the time were skeptical. Cutting your own wrists deeply enough to sever the radial artery is incredibly difficult. The pain would be excruciating. Most people who attempt suicide by cutting wrists make shallow, hesitant cuts, not deep, professional ones. Second, Abdulaziz's personality. This was not a man who gave up easily. He was strong, proud, a fighter. Yes, he was depressed. Yes, he was humiliated. But 5 days? After 5 days, you kill yourself? Third, the guards. Where were they? Abdulaziz was under constant surveillance. There were guards outside his door. How did nobody hear anything? How did the former Sultan manage to kill himself in a guarded room without anyone noticing until it was too late? Fourth, the motivation of the new government. Abdulaziz alive was a problem. Even deposed, he had loyalists, supporters, officers who respected him. He could become a rallying point for opposition. Abdulaziz dead? Problem solved. Fifth, what happened just a few months later? Murad V, the new sultan, started showing signs of mental illness. Or did he? Some historians think he was drugged or driven mad deliberately. Either way, after just 3 months, Murad was also deposed, declared insane, locked away in Turan Palace for the rest of his life. And who became Sultan? Abdulhamid II. Another of Abdulaziz's nephews, a man who would rule with an iron fist for 33 years. Convenient, right? Both Abdulaziz and Murad removed within months, both under suspicious circumstances. It is hard not to see a pattern. So what really happened? Theory 1. Suicide. Abdulaziz was genuinely depressed, humiliated, broken by the loss of everything he had worked for, and in a moment of despair, he took his own life. This is the official story, and it is possible. Being deposed after 15 years of rule would devastate anyone. But Theory 2. Murder. The new government, led by Midhat Pasha and Hussein Avni Pasha, decided Abdulaziz was too dangerous to keep alive, so they had him killed. Made it look like suicide. Used a friendly physician to cover it up. This theory has significant support. Because years later, after Midhat Pasha fell from power and was himself executed, some officials began speaking more openly. One former palace official claimed that Abdulaziz had been murdered on orders from the new government, that the wounds were inflicted by professionals, that the suicide was staged. Another theory suggests it was not a government conspiracy, but personal revenge. Abdulaziz had made enemies, powerful enemies. Maybe someone with access to the palace took the opportunity to eliminate him. We will never know for certain. The truth died with everyone involved. But here's what we can say. The circumstances were suspicious. The evidence was questionable. And the people who benefited most from his death were the ones who controlled the investigation. Draw your own conclusions. Abdulaziz's death sent shockwaves through the empire. His mother, Pertevni al-Sultan, was devastated. She never believed it was suicide. She spent the rest of her life claiming her son had been murdered. His wives and children were pushed aside. Some were given pensions and quietly retired. Others fell into obscurity. His eldest son, Yusuf Izzeddin, would later become heir to the throne under Sultan Abdulhamid II. But he too would die under suspicious circumstances in 1916. Officially a suicide, but many suspected foul play. The cycle of tragedy continued. As for the empire itself, it did not recover. The constitutional reforms Midhat Pasha promised, they happened briefly but were then suspended by Abdul Hamid II, who ruled as an absolute monarch. The debt crisis Abdulaziz left behind, it got worse, much worse. The uprisings in the Balkans, they escalated into full-scale wars. The empire lost massive territories, and within 50 years, the Ottoman Empire would collapse entirely. Abdulaziz had tried to save it, tried to modernize it, tried to make it competitive with Europe. But the empire was not ready, or maybe it was too late. Either way, Abdulaziz's dream died with him, whether by his own hand or someone else's. Today, Sultan Abdulaziz is a complicated figure in Turkish and Ottoman history. Some see him as a visionary, a modernizer who understood what the empire needed and tried to deliver it, a sultan who built a world-class navy and infrastructure, who traveled to Europe as an equal and brought back ideas that could have saved the empire. Others see him as an extravagant failure, a sultan who bankrupted the empire with his lavish spending and grandiose projects, who prioritized appearance over substance, who left behind crushing debt and instability. Both views have merit. Abdulaziz was ambitious. He genuinely wanted to modernize the empire. He invested in the navy, in railways, in education. But he also lived lavishly. He built new palaces when the treasury was empty. He borrowed recklessly without sustainable plans to repay. He was strong physically, but perhaps not politically astute enough to navigate the treacherous waters of 19th century Ottoman politics. And in the end, the system he tried to reform destroyed him. Whether he took his own life in despair or was murdered by those who saw him as a threat, the result is the same. Sultan Abdulaziz died in a pool of blood in a palace room. And the truth of what happened died with him. If this story of ambition, mystery, and unanswered questions moved you, if you are sitting there wondering what really happened in that room in June 1876, hit that like button. Because history is not always clear. It is not always neat. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones where we will never know the full truth, where the official version does not quite make sense, where the evidence raises more questions than it answers. And Sultan Abdulaziz's death is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Ottoman history. We are uncovering all these stories, the conspiracies, the cover-ups, the rulers who died under suspicious circumstances, the modernizers who were destroyed by the systems they tried to change. So, if you want more content that makes you question everything you thought you knew about history, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment. Do you think Abdulaziz was murdered or did he commit suicide? What does the evidence tell you? Could he have saved the Ottoman Empire if he had lived? We want to know what you think. Thanks for watching. And remember, in history, the official story is not always the true story. Sometimes the truth is buried with the dead, and sometimes that is exactly what someone wanted.